Hi, everyone. You're watching CBC News BC. It's Friday. I'm Burritt here in the Vancouver newsroom. Here are your top stories. Well, in New Westminster, roads are closed and more than a dozen homes have been evacuated because of a water main break. The city says Columbia Street from McBride Boulevard to Richmond Street is closed in both directions until further notice. Metro Vancouver says that the main broke around midnight and that it's been hard to stop the flow of water.
For any large pipe, 3-foot diameter and above, think of that water coming through the pipe as a freight train coming down the tracks. You can't just stop it. It takes hours to not only isolate all the valves around, also to redirect water into the areas, but then also to gradually slow down the flow. So it can't be stopped immediately.
And crews are on scene and people are being told to avoid that area. No word yet on when it'll all reopen. And BC's finance minister says the government is going to back up on a key election promise because of Trump's tariff threats. The government will no longer be providing the $1,000 grocery rebate, which would have gone out to about 90% of British Columbians.
It won't be in the budget. I know this is disappointing for people. It is something that we wanted to do and something that we were working on. But that was a moment in time before an unpredictable person was in the White House and threatened our jobs, our businesses, and the revenue that we need to power the programs and services that British Columbians rely on.
Now, in response to this, the BC Conservative finance critic accused Premier David Eby of looking for a scapegoat for the NDP's financial mismanagement. And the government also says that it will be freeze hiring the public sector of employees, except those in core positions like social workers or correctional officers. And BC's minimum wage is going up, and here's how much more you'll make. So the province has increased the minimum wage by 2.6%, or 45 cents. That's rising from $17.40 to $17.85 per hour. That will be starting on June 1st. The government says residential caretakers, live-in home support workers, camp leaders, and app-based ride-hailing and delivery service workers will also receive that increase. The Minister of Labour says this is to help keep up with inflation. And this all comes after changes were made to the Employment Standards Act, which made annual wage increases mandatory. And LifeLabs workers in BC could soon start striking as this Sunday. Its union served a 72-hour strike notice yesterday. The sticking points come down to wage increases, employees want solutions to staff shortages, and better health and safety benefits.
Workers here are taking action not simply to ensure that they're making a living wage, but they're in a good position to be able to provide the quality service that they want to provide to their friends and neighbors and fellow residents in Canada.
So how could this affect you? Well, the union says as an essential service, LifeLabs will still operate, but some of those locations might have rotating temporary closures. The union says employees have been without a contract since April. And if you are in southern Vancouver Island, you might have felt a 3.8 magnitude earthquake last night. This is the latest in a string of tremors in BC this week. And Earthquakes Canada says it happened around 10 p.m. on Thursday. It was lightly felt in Victoria, Sydney, and across southern Vancouver Island. The agency says nearly 300 people reported feeling that quake, but no damage was reported. And those are your headlines. I'm Burritt. Stay with us. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. February 15th is Flag Day in Canada. And amid tariff threats from Donald Trump, there's a growing sense of pride in this country. Are you feeling prouder to be Canadian? What does the maple leaf mean to you? And after that, Master Gardener Brian Minter will be here to answer your green questions as we inch towards spring. I'm Dan Burritt, in for Michelle Elliott. Welcome to a Valentine's Day edition of BC Today. Thank you for joining us on radio, TV, and on our live stream. You can call us now on our top story. What does Flag Day mean to you? The maple leaf. Are you feeling a renewed sense of Canadian patriotism in the face of U.S. tariff threats? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950 across BC, 604-669-3733 in Metro Vancouver, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. As we said, tomorrow, February 15th, is Flag Day across country, marking the 60th anniversary Canada adopted the maple leaf as our national emblem. It also comes as Canada stares down the barrel of Donald Trump's tariff threats and anti-Canadian rhetoric, including suggestions we become the 51st U.S. state. In the wake of that, a renewed sense of Canadian patriotism is being felt across this country. A Leger poll published this week found Trump's threats are driving a swell of national pride, with 85% of Canadians saying they feel proud to be Canadian. And all 5 of Canada's living former prime ministers are asking people to fly the maple leaf like never before tomorrow. Here's former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Joe Clark speaking today on CBC Radio's The Current.
There's been a clear statement of real pride in Canada from across the country, including, interestingly, in Quebec, where that has not always been the definition. But I think that the initial reaction of Canadians, the widespread expression of confidence and faith in our country is an asset we have to build on. And sometimes simple things are what we have to do.
Former Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien joined Stephen Quinn on CBC Radio's The Early Edition this morning.
And I'm very pleased with the way that everybody is united at this time and fighting the cause of Canada. So it is a special occasion. Tomorrow is Flag Day, and it was past 60 years ago on the 15th of February 1965. And I was there. I was the MP, and I was the parliamentary secretary to Mike Pearson, who was the prime minister who introduced the new Canadian flag. So it's a great day for celebration.
And former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Kim Campbell also spoke with the Early Edition yesterday.
If Canada has a really exuberant and enthusiastic celebration of our Flag Day, celebrating the 60th anniversary, that will be an important signal both to the United States but the rest of the world, how devoted we are to our country and how proud we are of our flag and the history that it represents. But the other thing is, I think a lot of people feel a little bit helpless. You know, we're not really sure what to do. And by celebrating Flag Day, by finding ways of waving the flag and displaying the flag and talking about it, I think it can perhaps create a sense of solidarity.
We would like to hear from you now. What does the maple leaf mean to you? Do you feel prouder to be Canadian as we face these external threats? What do you want our leaders to do in these moments? What do you make of the call to fly the flag tomorrow? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. Our number in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now to take your calls and for some insight is Craig Baird. He's the host of the podcast Canadian History Ehx. That's EHX. Very good. Hello, Craig. Nice to have you join us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What do you make of this rising sense of Canadian pride, patriotism that we're seeing right now?
It's really something that's nice to see. I think that when I talk to people about Canadian pride, it's always there, but it's under the surface. It's not something that we really let out too often. And usually when it comes out, it's for sporting events like the Summit Series or, the Vancouver Olympics or things like that. But it's something that's always kept under the surface, and sometimes it'll spring up and we'll really celebrate being Canadian and feel a great deal of pride in our country.
Yeah, it's not exactly the national normality to fly the flag as openly as perhaps our southern neighbors and other countries. Now, many Canadians might not be familiar with the national flag of Canada. And what was the significance of Flag Day when, or at least first of all, when the maple leaf was inaugurated in 1965?
It was very significant because before that we had the Red Ensign, and a major part of the Red Ensign was the Union Jack. And so when Lester B. Pearson and the Liberals were looking to create a flag, they really wanted to create a flag that didn't have any kind of colonial aspects to it, either to the French or to the English. And that's how we came up with the Canada flag as we know it. It was something that had to be unique and had to be something that represented Canadians, whether they were at home or abroad or serving their country overseas in the military. It had to be something very recognizable. And it is. I think it's one of the most recognizable flags in the world.
How was it first received in 1965? Because there was build-up to this. When it was unveiled, Canadians were asked to submit their own ideas and designs.
Yeah, it was definitely a long process. It took roughly a year for it to actually get to the point where we were flying it. And there was a lot of opposition to it. A lot of veterans who had fought under the Red Ensign didn't want to see the flag changed. And Mr. B. Pearson had to essentially go to the veterans, to the Legion Convention in Winnipeg, and speak to them directly and explain why he wanted to make a flag specifically for Canada. And of course, John Diefenbaker was incredibly opposed to the new flag. Even when he was buried, the Canada flag on his coffin is slightly obscured by the Red Ensign because he was so against this new flag. But it was something that a lot of Canadians did respond to. We were approaching our 100th anniversary in 1967, and a lot of Canadians did want a flag that could identify themselves as Canadians. And there were thousands of flags that came into the flag committee, everything from regular things that were drawn by just average people from the group of seven. The Beatles were very popular at the time, so there were flags that featured the Beatles on it. And it was something that a lot of Canadians responded to. And of all those thousands of flags, it was eventually narrowed down to the Pearson pennant and the Canadian flag as we know it before the vote happened.
We have calls coming in. We're going to get to them as soon as we can. We're with Craig Baird. He's a history buff and the host of the Canadian History Ehx podcast. The flag has many meanings, Craig, depending on who is looking at it. For some, it can be seen as a source of pride. For others, for example, perhaps some Indigenous people, it can be seen as a symbol of oppression. How has identity intersected with our flag, the maple leaf historically?
I think for a lot of Canadians, it is something they tie their identity to. And, there was that time where Canadians were wearing their flag on their backpack as a sign of pride and to say that I'm Canadian, I'm not American when I'm backpacking across Europe. But you are right, there are other aspects to it. And the First Nations, some do see it as a colonial aspect, as something that is not as well received and something that, they would like to see maybe more Indigenous aspects to that flag when it was initially created. But then there's also refugees and people coming to Canada who see that flag as a beacon of hope, of a new life. It's something they recognize and they want to be able to fly it with pride.
Let's go to Ken now. Ken, thanks for your patience on the phone. You're calling us from Christina Lake, beautiful Christina Lake. How are you feeling right now about the flag?
Well, I fly the Canadian flag out the front of my house every day of the year. I'm a very proud Canadian. I always have been. I was raised that way. And I think at times like this, there is a silver lining to this situation because I think it's pulling Canadians together. Not that we weren't always together, but in a crisis, Canada stands up. Look at what we've done in the past during the wars. I think that it upsets me when I hear the booing of the U.S. national anthem at hockey games because we shouldn't treat people as bad as they are, but treat them as good as we are. And we always have done that. There's so many little things that come to mind. Everybody is afraid now, but fear is only gains credibility if we let it. I think this is a test for Canadians, and I think we're going to come through it very well. I always think of a saying that former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau said, The concept of an all-Canadian boy or girl is absurd. A society which emphasizes uniformity is one that creates intolerance and hate. We have lived next to that our whole lives as a country, and we have been a very good friend and neighbor of theirs. Friends don't treat friends like this.
Ken, we appreciate your call from Christina Lake. Thank you very much. Before I get to Craig, I want to get to Chris in Victoria on the line. Chris, what do you make of Flag Day and the Maple Leaf?
Well, I've always been excited about Flag Day. I think it's great. I have a bit of a personal connection because Flag Day also happens to be my birthday.
Happy birthday.
But thank you very much. But, I think we have a wonderful flag. I think it's known around the world, not just as a symbol of Canada, but as what we stand for. I was saying before the call that I always worn on my backpack when I travel abroad, and I've taught numerous Americans with the Canadian flag on their backpack. I just think it's really, really nice to see everybody pulling together. To the previous caller's point, I think we need to be careful about punching back and punching down with the booing of the American anthem. I think our flag is known worldwide to stand for something positive and strength and diversity, and I think that we need to have that strength right now, but it is really nice to see everybody pulling together, unified in it.
Chris, I have to ask, as a backpacker with a maple leaf on your back, what sort of reaction did you get?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, you normally meet people face to face, and people quite often, assume because I have a North American accent that I'm an American, and then I usually turn around and point at the flag, and then the smiles come to people's faces, and it's really nice. People don't know that much about us, except for that we're really nice and friendly, but people have lots of questions and are always, I think, very interested to learn more about Canada and are quite happy to hear that we're not American.
All right, Chris, we appreciate your call. Thanks very much. Craig Baird, what do you make of what you heard from Chris? It certainly has been a symbol overseas that, and I've done the same when I backpacked, had that maple leaf proudly displayed on the bag, and generally you were welcome pretty much anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something that appeared in that Molson ad, I Am Canadian, where he says, I can proudly wear my country's flag on my backpack. It is something that we definitely identify with. And again, that's kind of the reason that that flag was created, because during the Suez crisis, American or Canadian troops were wearing the red ensign, which again contained the Union Jack. And so a lot of people identified that with the United Kingdom. And by creating something that was wholly unique, wholly Canadian, we separated ourselves not only from the United Kingdom, but from the United States. And yeah, people do wear that proudly around the world when they're visiting other countries now.
Let's go to Daniel in Vancouver. What a great name. Daniel, what do you make of Flag Day and this renewed sense of patriotism in Canada?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm Canadian by choice. I came here from the United States about 25 years ago. I did the work to become a landed immigrant and then a citizen. And I feel I never doubted that decision. But recent events make me feel even more vindicated by it. I am very proud to be Canadian. I am giving serious thought to no longer being a U.S. citizen. And I am very much on side with Flag Day. You asked earlier, what do I think that politicians and leaders should be doing? Well, professionally, I'm involved with traffic and vehicle safety. And one of the things that's always sort of stuck in my craw is that a lot of the Canadian standards and regulations for that pretty much go along with the U.S. standards because, well, in the U.S. it's right there and it's a big country and it's just easier that way. The rest of the world uses United Nations standards, which in many cases do a whole lot better job, everything from pedestrian protection to headlights and headlight glare and child safety seats and everything else. I think it would be really nice if we could take this opportunity to say, maybe we don't need to be in lockstep with the United States and only the United States on so many of the standards and regulations that shape how this country works, how our cars work, and how our grocery stores work, and how food safety standards and everything else. Maybe we can look outward a little more at what the rest of the world is doing, what Europe is doing, and saying, that lines up a little better with Canadian values. Let's pull back a little from the United States sort of, we're right and the whole rest of the world is wrong type of approach, and maybe get with the rest of the world a little more.
We certainly stay on the line, Daniel. We know that there has been a push to improve and tear down interprovincial trade barriers. And Craig Baird, you know this well, that there are different standards across this country, and many provinces have found it easier to trade north-south than across the second largest landmass on Earth, this big, beautiful country. Just before we get to that, Daniel, would you really give up your American citizenship? It's among the most coveted on Earth.
Yeah, and that is there's a very strong push and sort of a very, I don't quite want to call it a knee jerk, but there's a reflexive reaction. Oh my God, you have U.S. citizenship. Surely you wouldn't give that up. Well, I really have to look at it almost from a cost benefit perspective. I think the assumption is, well, if you have U.S. citizenship, that is automatically, this great big basket of benefits. Well, no, increasingly it feels more like a burden and a basket of liabilities than it does like a basket of benefits. And so I'm not going to do it today. I'm not going to do it tomorrow, but I am giving it very serious thought. And if you have another second, I just wanted to sort of close out with one additional thought. Very shortly after I came to this country, I had CBC tuned in, and I don't remember which show it was, but somebody made a joke. They said, what's the difference between an American and a Canadian? The Canadian knows the difference. I almost drove off the road laughing so hard. And I think that struck me as particularly funny because Canada was so new to me and I was seeing all of it, very much for the first time. But I really think what we're seeing now just really draws a couple of very big, bold underlines under that. That we're one continent, but I think people, particularly Americans, tend to think, oh, Canada, it's pretty much the same. You got all the same brands in the grocery store. There's superficial differences, but it's pretty much the same. No. It's exactly the opposite. The similarities are superficial. It's the differences that run clean down to bedrock. And I think people are sort of awakening to that, and I think it's great to see.
Daniel, we appreciate your call and your perspective. Thanks very much. We're going to get to Tasha in just a moment on the line. Stay on the line. Craig Baird, I want to pick up on some of the things that you heard there from Daniel and this pull and push of the fact that this country was formed out of the modern version, I should say. 1867 was a compromise rather than a revolution.
Absolutely, and it's something that we definitely take pride in, the fact that we did create this country based on a whole bunch of conferences and agreements that we made to form it. And
we love a committee.
Yeah, we and that's how the flag was created too, through a committee. And with the provinces and things like that came in, it was the same thing. It was we were just kind of forming it out of something. There wasn't a lot of conflict. There were some conflicts, Upper and Lower Canada Rebellion, the Northwest Resistance, those kind of things, but nothing like we saw in the United States. And that definitely is something we take a lot of pride in. And even across the world with peacekeeping and things like that, we definitely try and portray ourselves and see ourselves as peacekeepers who are looking for a resolution rather than war or conflict.
Let's go to Tasha in Vancouver. Tasha, thanks for joining us. What do you make of Flag Day and this renewed sense of patriotism?
Well, I'm all about the patriotism for sure. I've always felt that way, and I'm thrilled to see Canadians showing their pride. But I have to admit that in 2022, when all these anti-vaccine protests were going on and people were marching on the Burritt Bridge and elsewhere using the Canadian flag, I was taken aback every time I saw my own flag. It instilled fear in me because of the rhetoric and the point of view of those people, and it just set me back. So I'm glad we're feeling good about we're using our flag, what I feel for positive means. Unite us, not divide.
Tasha, we appreciate the call. I want to jump to Dale now in South Surrey. Dale, I think you feel a bit the same as Tasha. There's a sentiment running there.
Tasha certainly took my feelings and expressed them well. The Freedom Convoy co-opted the Canadian flag in a way that made me almost feel unproud of it. But the next several years are going to be very, very difficult for the country, and I think I need to get over that feeling. And as I told the producer, I'm going to go out and look for a flag because I think that it's really important.
Appreciate the call, Dale. Thanks very much. And we know, Craig Baird, I don't know if this is the same in Edmonton where you are. Our colleague Liam Britton did a story, and flag shops are run off their feet, they tell us, with orders for maple leafs.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm starting to see more and more of those starting to appear. And like your caller said, growing up, or not growing up, but being in Alberta, I definitely saw a lot of flags flying in 2022. And the first thought was that they were convoy supporters. I also saw the flag flying upside down probably more than any time in my life, other than when the Americans flew it upside down at the 1992 World Series. And it was definitely something that was surprising to see the flag flying upside down. So it's really nice to see that people are buying flags and are looking to fly them, out of a national pride and patriotism.
Mm-hmm. Craig Baird, the host of the the podcast Canadian History Ehx. That's EHX. We really appreciate your time and your perspective. Thanks for joining us, and happy Valentine's Day to you and yours.
Thank you. You as well.
It is approaching 1226. This is BC Today. We want to read some emails for you now, and we appreciate everyone who's called and emailed. Apologies, we couldn't get to everybody. KMC says, I'm definitely feeling more patriotic since Trump's tariff threats include buying as many products that were made in Canada as possible. More importantly, I'm doing anything I can to not buy USA products. Also canceled our trip to Hawaii and will not travel to the US for at least 4 years. That's not an uncommon sentiment that we've heard. Marcel writes, I served in the military. The oath I swore to would make me a dissident to a fascist regime. As a veteran, I take the Trump threats beyond tariffs extremely seriously. I picked up my flag today. And Brenda says, I'm proud to be a Canadian for many reasons, but one that stands out for me today is our willingness to face our mistakes as a nation, say sorry and strive to do better. Nothing changes if reality is not acknowledged. We might be one of the world's oldest continuous democracies, but we're still evolving into the best version of what we can be as a community of communities, a place where all of us can thrive. I will wear and fly our flag with pride. Joseph tells us, I love Canada, born here, raised here, and consider myself a true patriot, strong and free. But this sudden patriotism is verging on a pathetic identity crisis. Was there a Flag Day last year, 2 years ago, 10 years ago? We still have a lot to learn as a nation, and the last 3 weeks are proof positive. Our master whistles and we jump. And Sandra writes, Dr. George F.G. Stanley was a close family friend. The design for the Canadian flag was taken from the flag of the Royal Military College in Kingston. Dr. Stanley was a professor of history when my husband was a cadet there. We fly the flag all year round. We really appreciate your emails. Thanks very much. We really appreciate all the emails. My goodness, they are coming in fast. I'm just going to pick one right here. Tim says, we're all very patriotic, and I support that, but wouldn't our veterans of the Second World War be saddened to see that their sacrifice have led to Canada's absolute complicity in the horrific killing in Palestine? I know this will never be read on air, but someone at CBC can read this and delete. Well, Tim, we read it. So there you go. Let's go to one more here. We'll go to Pat, who says, any chance of playing the Maple Leaf forever? Be a great idea for the Hockey Four Nations game tomorrow night. Thank you from Patricia in Prince George. And let's get to one more here. I've always been proud, says Diane, of my country, and I'm so happy to be able to take my flag back from the so-called Freedom Convoy. For the past few years, I've been reluctant to fly it for fear I would be labeled as being in agreement with them. We'll read your emails later on. We can't get to all of them on air, but we appreciate them. Thanks very much. This is BC Today on CBC, Radio 1, CBC Television, live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube, and on the news app. Coming up, calling all green thumbs. And look, someone's already emailed for Master Gardener Brian Minter here to answer your gardening questions as we inch to spring. That's after this news update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. BC's Forest Minister says he predicts that tariffs and further duties on softwood lumber imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump may reach up to 55%. Ravi Parmar says BC will find out how much the tariffs and duties will be increased by the government in a couple of weeks. The minister is in California to meet with industry leaders and politicians about the potential impacts. Dozens of people have been forced from their homes after a water main break in New Westminster late last night. Road closures are also in effect. The city says Columbia Street from McBride Boulevard to Richmond Street is closed in both directions until further notice. And BC's minimum wage is set to increase by 45 cents an hour starting in June. It will go from $17.40 to $17.85 to keep up with inflation. The province says the 2.6% increase follows changes made last spring to the Employment Standards Act, which mandates yearly wage increases. And now the forecast on the North Coast, mainly cloudy this afternoon with a high of 3. Highs around minus 21 with periods of light snow in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of minus 13. Highs from minus 8 to minus 1 with periods of snow in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a chance of flurries with a high of minus 3. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with highs to 6 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zimmerman, and thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. We're everywhere. So, roses are red, violets are blue. On the Coast has some Valentine's Day coverage for you. Gloria, what are you up to?
Happy Valentine's Day to you. I hope you can join us for On the Coast this afternoon, because since it is Valentine's, we are going to talk about all the pet names, you know, the nicknames that you save for that special someone. Maybe it's Pookie or Boo or Darlin', Babe. We're going to talk about the names that they feel right and maybe the ones that just make you cringe a little bit too. And tomorrow is Flag Day. It hasn't been that important of a day for a lot of people for a long time, but this year, you know, with all the tension between Canada and the United States, there are renewed calls to fly the flag. You know, the maple leaf was only introduced in the mid-60s, so we are going to talk to someone today who has a special connection to it, a swimmer at the first Commonwealth Games that flew the new flag. So I hope you can join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Oh, thanks very much, Shmoopy. I mean, Gloria, you can hear On the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver and anywhere on the CBC News app. Just before we get to Brian Minter and your gardening calls, we want to update you on a major problem that's closed a busy road in Metro Vancouver. A water main burst in New Westminster overnight, flooding roads and forcing more than a dozen homes to be evacuated. The CBC's Jessica Cheung is live near the break in New Westminster and joins us now. Jessica, what's the latest?
Yeah, Dan, so things are quieting down here a bit, but crews are still working to kind of clean up all of the mess and the damage after that water main break in New West. And you can see behind, or you can see there's still some water trickling, but Metro Vancouver says pretty much that this break happened last night, just before midnight, on Francis Way, which is actually up the hill from here, and water kind of came flowing down from that road down to Jameson Court, which is where I am right now. It also actually turned around and then went further down onto East Columbia Street. causing a bunch of road closures in the area. Now, I spoke to the deputy chief, fire chief this morning, who said that in over his 2 decades of work, this is the worst water main break that he has ever seen, saying that there were just floods of water coming down the street. 50 people were evacuated, that's what he said, from Francis Way. A number of units here on Jameson Court had to have their power cut just because some of that water was seeping into their electrical rooms, and of course the road closures. So definitely a really messy situation here, Dan.
And what happens next, Jessica, in terms of repairs or reopenings?
Yeah, so Metro Vancouver says that the pipe that burst has been isolated. The water has been shut off. Some of this water that's coming down now is just pretty much the water draining from after the water was shut off. What happens next is that when it's safe to do so, they are going to go excavate that pipe just to see exactly what happened. So we're not exactly sure what happened in terms to what caused that pipe to burst. And then, of course, comes the repairs. Now, Metro Vancouver has no timeline on this, says work is going to kind of go on from now into the weekend, could take weeks. And their task right now really is to divert the water, stop it from kind of pooling anywhere. As for damage, again, not a lot of answers in terms of how many buildings were damaged, that kind of thing. And we have really no idea when those people who were displaced can also go back to their homes. So lots of questions here right now, Dan.
Okay. The CBC's Jessica Cheung live in New Westminster at the water main break. Jessica, thanks very much.
Thanks.
All right, this time of year marks a new beginning for gardeners. As the weather cycle starts to change, we just came out of a frosty season, certainly here on the South Coast, and it's still cold across much of our giant province. But what does this mean for your plants as we inch closer, even slowly, into spring? Well, Brian Minter is here with his gardening advice and to take your questions. He's joining us from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack. Brian, good to see you. And if you want to call in now, give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. Email us, and some of you already have, bctoday@cbc.ca. Brian, we're moving away from the freeze. The forecast looking a little bit wetter in the coming days. How has this winter so far been for gardeners?
Well, Dan, let me tell you, there's a lot of gardeners across the are ready to go. They're ready to go 2 weeks ago. But anyway, in that's really the. I'm sorry, Dan?
No, go ahead. We had a little freeze on you. Yeah. Go ahead, Brian. We had a little freeze on our end, but you're good to go.
Good. Thank you so much. Anyway, we have a gardening community right across the province who are ready to go. And the cold we had, thank goodness it wasn't anywhere near the chill of last year, but we need that winter. We need that cold for disease control, for insect control. So it's actually a good thing. And for many of our plants and so on, that little bit of dormancy, because we had a very mild winter up to that point, and that really made all the difference. So it's a positive thing. But because folks in the Lower Mainland now are kind of ready to go, we have to wait for a few things right across the province. Dan, the frost has to come out first. Mm-hmm. It wasn't severely cold. My gosh, Vancouver was, 8 months, 10. That's unusual for them for several days, but the frost kept getting, so we have to wait for that time, the frost to come out of the ground. If we can get some rain, that's good. That speeds up the process. But Dan, the big thing is this.
Brian, apologies. Brian, I'm just going to pause you there for just 1 sec, just to remind our audience, apologies. We're having a little technical issue with Brian. We're going to get back to him in just a moment. Brian, if you can hear me, we do have some emails coming in. If you can hear us, I'll let you finish, Brian. Go ahead if the connection's better. Okay, we're going to move. We're going to move to Brian. We're going to get him back on the line in just a moment. Give us just a moment, and we will get back to Brian. But what we want to do first is go to a story that is part of our last block. After weeks of tariff threats and more talk of Canada becoming the 51st state, politicians and pollsters, as we said, are noting a surge in Canadian pride. And as Liam Britton reports, some stores are seeing it too.
Making America rich again.
After mounting tariff threats from the U.S., a wave of patriotism is surging over many Canadians.
Wave the flag.
Speaking of wave.
Our phones are absolutely ringing off the hook. We haven't stopped. We're all kind of running around.
This flag maker says feelings of "Oh Canada" are having them "So Canada," a lot more than usual. Flying Colors in Port Coquitlam has had a busy few weeks.
It's very exciting. It's a very proud moment to be able to supply flags and be a part of the process. I'm a very proud Canadian myself, so it's just an honor to be a part of it.
Including orders from outside the country.
It's been interesting to see more orders south of the border.
It's not just flag polls where this sentiment is being noticed, it's also in opinion polls. Recent surveys from Leger and Angus Reid found upticks in respondents saying they feel pride in Canada.
We are not interested in simply abandoning it and becoming the 51st state. That's really become clear, and Canadians are finding a voice in saying that out loud.
It's a sentiment politicians are hearing.
This is a response of Canadians who are saying, yeah, this is going to be tough, but we're going to double down on Canadian pride and standing up for each other.
And in Washington, where federal and provincial politicians are presenting a united front against tariffs, it's a sentiment being delivered to U.S. leaders.
I certainly raised with them the solidarity that we've seen across the country in terms of meeting this moment in a way that protects the sovereignty of Canada and protects our economic interests.
And Saturday is National Flag Day.
Just had a customer come in and bought a 6-foot telescopic pole with, a 2-foot by 4-foot flag for their house, and they didn't have one before. So I think it's nice to see a lot of additions to flags on houses.
And speaking of new additions, on Wednesday afternoon, a member of Donald Trump's White House staff posted on X, claiming there's still no agreement Canada won't become the 51st state. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
We have Brian Minter back with us. Thanks for your patience, Brian, and everybody who is waiting to get some answers on gardening and things like that as well. Brian, thanks for doing this. Apologies for that tech trouble. Just remind us.
No, it's all good, Dan.
Okay, so I'll let you continue around what winter has been like.
Yeah, the frost was a good thing right across the province for disease control, for insect control, and to harden off a lot of plants that really had a very mild winter. So overall, it hasn't been severe. It's been great. But Dan, my greatest concern right now is the fact that as the frost starts coming out of the ground, the key is really not to just put things in the ground. Actually, don't plant fruit trees or small fruits and so on. Wait, when the frost comes out, we need a few days for that kind of gooey mess to be able to get some consistency. So usually about 4 or 5 days, a week after the frost is out of the ground, we're ready to go, which is a lot of folks are really waiting for. Because, Dan, at this time of year, certainly in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver, the Gulf Islands and so on, Vancouver Island, a lot of folks are ready to start planting some of the small fruits, blueberries and so on, fruit trees, and nothing wrong with doing that once the frost is out and we're actually ready to begin. And, Dan, a lot of folks, too, I think by the end of February, early part of March, are looking to put a few things in the garden. Anything that's cold hardy, the cool loving plants certainly could go in. But a couple of reminders that later is better, rather than trying to be the first one to walk to have your peas and potatoes. Wait until the weather does become consistently warm. Our golden rule is when we get daytime temperatures about 10 degrees Celsius consistently without a night frost, we're ready to go for all the cool loving plants. So that's something to bear in mind. And really, but I think so many people down are anxious, are ready to go. Winter's over. Let's move forward. That's kind of where we are right now.
And technically it's not over, but I'm picking up what you're putting down, Mr. Minter. Let's go to our calls now. Spencer is in East Vancouver. Spencer, what's your question for Brian?
Hi, nice to be on the radio. We have a ground floor apartment, and we have this retaining wall that's kind of deteriorating. So we're looking to stabilize the soil that makes up parts of the retaining wall, and we're looking to provide some greenery, some cover. And the problem is we get almost no direct sunlight in that particular area of our yard. So I was wondering what would look good and help hold on to the soil, because right now when it rains, the rain splashes the mud and it splashes on our windows, and it's kind of ugly.
All right. Spencer, thanks very much.
Okay.
Brian, help.
Yeah, Spencer. Yes, of course. Now, Spencer, I do have a couple of questions for you. What type of slope are we talking about, and what depth or what height of the slope do we have here?
So the retaining wall is about 5 feet tall, and it's almost vertical. So it's like made out of almost like almost wood, like what you'd imagine like railroad ties, kind of crisscrossed. So there is soil depth in between the ties, but maybe they're set. Each step is about maybe 4 or 6 inches back from the one below it.
Okay, that's really helpful, Spencer. Thank you very much. Okay, but because we get very little sun, we want to have tenacious plants that will do and thrive in the shade. And the first thing that comes to my mind, Spencer, are some of the really good, resilient laurels. I love varieties like Otto Lucan, for example, which stays reasonably low, but there's a good green cover all year round, and the roots go deep, which is great. They also have, as they mature, fragrant flowers in the summertime. But start with something like the laurels, which you can spatter out. You want to have a nice look here as well. So strategically place them along the area. That'd be really great. And then once you have some laurels, you maybe want to put a bit of color in there. Any of our broadleaf plants that are love shade. There's so many. All the wonderful Pieris japonicas, one of the variegated ones. A lot of the very, very nice leucothias, which is a brand new plant that with new varieties coming out, which are great. So you want to get a nice pattern of plants that are going to tolerate the shade, have good roots on them. Those are some of the very best. And then the next thing you want to do, if you want to get some tenacious ground cover going below, there are ground covers, and you have to be careful. We don't want to get invasive ones out there, but there are many ground covers you can put below that'll really help stabilize and that bank and have it look really good at the same time, Spencer.
Great. Spencer, thanks so much for your call. We appreciate it. Victoria is joining us from Vancouver. Victoria, you're on with Brian.
Hi, Brian. I have a question about Himalayan sweetbox and weirdly Lithidora. Last year in the cold, I lost about 90% of my plants in the yard, about 80 plants.
Yes.
I waited patiently. They didn't come back. I reinvested, replanted, and now I'm very nervous about this long stretch of cold. Can you say anything about whether or not this depth of chill will do anything for such new plants that are not established?
Yeah. First of all, Victoria, I'm proud of you for hanging in there with the Serica coca or the Himalayan sweet box. For the past 50 to 70 years, we've never had a problem. But last year, it was so severe that was a problem. And Victoria, please don't worry. This type of weather has been perfect for all of the coffee. Anybody who's planted it and replanted it, you if I was near you, I'd give you a hug and say, not to worry, it's going to be okay. But seriously,
it was heartbreaking to lose them.
It was, and that lovely fragrance in the spring as well. But Victoria, with the winter we've had right now, in most winters, probably 95% of them, you would never have to worry. In the future, though, we all learned some valuable lessons last year. When we do get that severe cold or a forecast on CBC saying it's going to be that bad, two things you can do. Number one is throw some bark mulch, fir bark mulch around, or sawdust if you have it, as an insulator for the roots. You'd never lose them with that. And sometimes, if it's not possible to do, there are insulating materials like frost blankets and so on. We do that a lot in the valley here. Just simply put frost blankets, which make a 10-degree Celsius difference immediately. So, Victoria, honestly, you did the right thing. You've got a couple of options in the future, but this year, you have no worries at all.
And do you think the Lithidora will live through what we just went through in that cold snap? Because I didn't plant them in the ground, but I put them in my window boxes, and they all look like they're dying.
Yes, I know, and they should. They're a Zone 7, but they would tolerate, honestly, as long as they don't go too wet. Lithidora do not like wet feet. If we start getting rain and so on, don't overwater them. But honestly, with the winter we've had in Vancouver, you're going to be fine. Honestly, I promise you.
Victoria, there you are. Brian's sending you a hug over the phone. Perfect on Valentine's Day, too. That's some good news. Before we get to Bev in North Vancouver, Brian, I want to read you an email from Susie in Kamloops, who says, I have a black sweet potato vine cutting that started last fall in water. It has grown roots. Will I be able to pot it up in soil, and will I be successful?
Yes. Great question. Absolutely. For Kamloops, perfect plant out there. They love the heat of the summertime. But the secret is this, a really high-quality potting soil with lots of perlite in it, so it's very open and porous, and as small a pot as you could put it in. I'm thinking like a 3-inch pot, a 4-inch pot, the most. So just, gently put it in there. Anytime right now, put it in a bright window, if at all possible, in terms of get it going, and just keep it moist. Again, don't overwater it and even miss the foliage until the roots turn from water roots to soil roots. So great time to do that right now.
All right. Brian, thanks very much. If you have a gardening question for our master gardener, Green Thumb Brian Minter, give us a call now, 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733 is our number in Metro Vancouver, pound 690 on your cell phone. Please be pulled over or hands-free if you're driving. And you can email us, and many of you have, bctoday@cbc.ca. Bev is joining us from North Vancouver. Bev, you're on with Brian.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for the chance to ask a question. We have a lawn with a serious moss problem. I've tried to get rid of it for probably the last 10 or 15 years. Tried everything except artificial turf. What can I do, please?
Okay. It's so confusing when we have damp weather, which we made up for things last fall. So we got so much rain over that fall period that the moss, it's thriving again. And I always ask, but why do the playing fields where the kids play soccer have no moss? And why do golf courses for that really have no moss? It's because of the soil below. The secret long-term is basically two things. Take an aerator where you can actually punch holes in the ground and take out cores of soil, and put a 1/4 inch of sand in there. So improving when water hits your ground or your soil or your lawn, the water gets away quickly. So aeration and a 1/4 inch of really well-drained sand. If you do that now, as the frost comes out of the ground, I would say probably mid-March would be an ideal time. And then again later this autumn, before the rains start, aeration and sand. That alone that will make all the difference. And the reason that golf courses, for the most part, and playing fields don't have moss is because they're planted in 1 foot of pure sand, and they're aerating all the time, and that makes all the difference. If the moss is really annoying, you can get iron sulfate put on as a moss control when we get warmer temperatures. That'll burn most of it off, which works really, really well. And then again, but ultimately, aeration and sand is going to be the key. And if you do this consistently, you'll have a beautiful lawn, just like the golf courses.
Bev, thanks very much for your call. We're going to get to John in Deep Cove in just a moment. Brian Armack writes to say, my 15-year-old tree is in need of pruning as the canopy of the tree has become densely intertwined with small branches. How can I best approach this without harming it? How much is too much to remove at one time? Also, what is the best time to approach this task? And it's a pink, I should clarify, this is a pink flowering dogwood.
Okay, great question, and so relevant to so many folks right now. Essentially, if we're in the Lower Mainland right now, it's a perfect time to begin pruning, if you haven't done so already. And the secret is that this is really important, Dan, is the buds on that tree are right now ready to pop. When the late May is going to bloom. So I would not do a thing on a pink dogwood loaded with blooms until the blossoms are finished. As soon as the blossoms are over, enjoy them. That's the whole neighborhood will enjoy it. But then you can go in and start thinning out the tree. How much is too much? The worst thing that's going to happen is you won't get as many blooms next year. But all the twiggy cross branches, the small little branches, simply thin them out. I would say take 1/3 of them out at the very least to get more air and sunlight into the tree to get better growth for the next year. But again, 1/3 to even more if you want to, but it's thinning and getting cross branches out, dead and diseased branches out of there as well, but really cleaning up the tree. But please wait until they bloom, then go and do it. You'll enjoy it much more.
All right. There you are, Armack. And let's fit in one more call here if we can. John is in Deep Cove. John, you're on with Brian.
Hi, Brian. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I have it's a blue, cerulean blue passion flower outside. It's a south-facing deck sitting in a 5-gallon wooden container. It didn't flower last year. I didn't cover it in burlap this past winter, probably against best practices. But when would you recommend that I feed it? It's safe to water it just yet.
Oh, good question. Now, John, this is really important. There are hardy varieties of the passiflora. There are hardy varieties. Those are the only ones that we carry a few in the summertime in most garden stores to make sure that people can see these beautiful, unique flowers. But there are hardy varieties. They are herbaceous. They die on the ground. They will even tolerate container conditions in Vancouver with no problem whatsoever. So first of all, we need to look in the future for the hardy varieties to make sure you've got them. But passifloras are really Zone 7, Zone 8 plants. They are very tender. I'm worried if you got it through last year. I mean, that's kind of a miracle out there. But at this point here, as it begins to thaw, just make sure you stay moist. We never want to overwater, but keep the soil just moist. And it's going to be, a long while. It's going to be probably 2-3 months before you're going to see any signs of any new growth coming along. But in the meantime, just moist. And then once the growth comes in earnest, and I hope it will for you, we'll give it some time to release fertilizer. I would say a 14-14-14, sometime in late May, early June, and that will feed it continuously right through until fall.
John, thanks so much
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your call. Brian, we're just up against the clock. I have to ask you quickly. It's Valentine's Day. Besides roses, what's your go-to for giving something green to your sweetie?
Oh, my goodness. The key thing right now is outdoor flowering plants that are in full bloom right now. The fragrant outdoor honeysuckles, the beautiful viburnum pink dawn, the Chinese witch hazels, which are in full bloom and beautiful fragrant, Prunus vumae. These are plants that you plant them now. They'll come back and bloom year after year at the same time. I mean, that's the best way to go by far. No question.
All right. Brian, we appreciate your time and your expertise as always. Happy Valentine's Day to you.
Thank you, Dan, so much, and to all our wonderful listeners.
Brian Minter, our gardening columnist, and joining us from Country Garden Limited in Chilliwack, and he'll be back in 2 weeks. That's it for our show. Thank you for calling in and joining our discussion. You can always email us, and many of you did, bctoday@cbc.ca.